Hi, my name is Kevin Wolz. I was around at the beginning of the Savannah Institute and worked there for a long time. And now I'm over here leading Canopy Farm Management, or Canopy more generally, where we kind of spun out of the Savannah Institute. We're a for-profit side of things. And Canopy, in a nutshell, plants and manages trees for farmers and landowners. We're out here getting the trees in the ground, doing the work, and yeah, making agroforestry happen on the landscape. In addition to planting and managing trees, we also run a nursery focused on tree crops. Many of the tree crops that you know and love, and hopefully even more that you know and love soon as we scale up. And so we're getting a lot of those out onto our own plantings. We have website sales as well for all those tree crops, sourcing the best genetics from all over the place. And at the end of the day, the whole point of Canopy is to actually add the capacity in the Midwest right now, and maybe elsewhere later, to do agroforestry, to make it easy to do agroforestry. When we look at our, the kind of row crop farmers next door, and how easy it is for that landowner or farmer to call up a contractor and say, okay, I want to do corn. I want you to do it no-till and just send me a check at the end of the year. Like, that's easy. And if we want those landowners and farmers to switch to doing trees, then it needs to be that easy for them to do that. And so that's the whole point of Canopy, is to make it easy and also to make it cheap. Again, we have conventional agriculture that has benefited from years and years and years and years of technology development and R&D and really honing the equipment and the processes. And most people are still using the same tree planter that was built in 1940 after the Dust Bowl. Like, that's just unacceptable. We can't be using century-old technology if we're going to be trying to revolutionize agriculture again. So we're trying to innovate the technology as well for efficiency, for cost effectiveness, and safety, ergonomics, all of those great things. I think that's Canopy in a nutshell. We currently have two hubs. One is in Champaign, Illinois, servicing much of Illinois, and one is in Spring Green, Wisconsin, right next door to the Savannah Institute Spring Green campus, servicing Wisconsin. And we have this kind of hub model to where we have all of the people and staff and equipment in a place to service an area. And as we expand into new regions, we just pop up a new hub, which is a building and people and staff and a cooler, to service that new area as there's more momentum and interest happening in other places. I think that's it.
Very good. Do you want to give us a word or two on your personal background besides the company?
Sure. So I started as someone more on the pure ecological restoration side of things, kind of discovered nature and restoration and doing that. And then I went to school down in central Illinois, where turns out like those things don't exist. And it was just really hard to rectify in my head, like, okay, but usually I was used to starting with like a degraded prairie and you can make it better, or you start with prairie and you move to savanna, like you can, but that wasn't really an option when you are in a landscape where every acre needs to be producing something and making money every year. And so I was like, okay, well, this can't just be like a non-starter. We can't just like, it's got to be either or. Is there some way to work together here? And so that led me down the whole path of permaculture and agroforestry and regenerative ag, and how can we do multiple things at once, multiple goals on the same acre. And so, yeah, did the whole kind of research academic thing, and that's all great. And I still love doing research, but I'm really today driven by actually getting trees in the ground. Now that I have a 4-year-old son, I see even more clearly the urgency by which we need to solve the climate crisis, and we cannot wait a minute longer to get trees in the ground as fast as possible.
Very good. Thank you. Austin, over to you.
Absolutely. So, Austin Unruh, and I run Trees for Graziers. My path to agroforestry, my path to where I am now, is not one that I would have anticipated if I was asked 10 years ago. My initial entry into the realm of agroforestry as a business was through, well, initially I took some courses at the University of Missouri, some of their online master's courses. And before too long, I figured out that I could either keep doing that studies or I could start doing some practical, hands-on, boots on the ground type work, but I couldn't really do both at the same time. And because there weren't any companies doing agroforestry in my area, and if I went to work for the conservation district, they would have sucked my soul dry and I would have died from boredom. I decided to start up my own company. And the company initially was called Crow and Berry Land Management, and where we focused primarily on riparian buffers, and even more specifically on multifunctional riparian buffers, where the goal was to be able to combine economics and ecological improvements so that a farmer would have more incentive to be able to make good, profitable use of that riparian buffer. But as I went along, some of my clients that I was working with on the riparian buffers were also grazers. So they had livestock out on pasture, mostly dairy cattle. And they were asking me, now that we have trees established in these riparian zones, how do we get trees established in the pasture? How might we create a silvopasture? And I didn't know of any really good methods that were available and widely used that did not require the land either to be taken out of production or you to fence out large areas and thereby create more management issues, where you lose production and you have to weed whack and trim and mulch inside of that area. So we started just experimenting with low cost means of getting trees established in a pasture, actively grazed pasture, without having to significantly change the management of that pasture. And so then that started our slow progression to where we are now, where we've changed our name. We are Trees for Graziers. That's the company. We still do riparian buffers. That's still a good chunk of our business, although that's getting smaller as a proportion of what we do as we do more and more silvopasture. And we did our first real sizable silvopasture planting in spring of 2020. So it's only been 3-4 years now, but we are well on our way towards doing a lot of silvopasture in this area. We have 25 farms that we've worked with to date, already installed trees on their farms, and most of that is in one small county here in Pennsylvania. So a very small geography that we've been able to get a really high concentration of agroforestry on the ground. And then next spring, we have another 12, 15 additional farms, including second or third phase projects on the same farms that we started with a couple of years ago. So we've been able to achieve a really high density of projects in this area, and over time we'll be looking to do that in other areas as well as we are able to expand. So probably similar to what Kevin and his team are looking at, is that there's a lot of opportunity, and we're trying to figure out how we can over time serve that. So like the name of the company would suggest, Trees for Graziers, we are a silvopasture focused company. We will do riparian buffers, a lot of those. We will do some alley cropping, but that's not really our skill. Alley cropping definitely is not our skill. We really are focused on supporting farmers to integrate trees into their pastures that are there to serve the livestock themselves. And in our context, in our area right now, most of those are dairies. I should note that we're a bootstrapped company. So everything that we've done has been built from just cash flow. Starting off with when I started as just me, and I was walking behind a BCS two-wheel tractor with a brush hog on the front, mowing riparian buffers, because you need a really small piece of equipment to get into these buffers in really tight areas here. Because you have a fence that's at 20 feet from the stream, and then you have 2 rows of trees in between. And if you come in there with a regular tractor, You're either going to get stuck or you're not going to be able to turn around. So just coming in and doing riparian buffer servicing all the way from there to now, when we have a team of 7 and we have consultants to help write plans. And then we have a field team as well as nursery staff. So our goal, very similar to what Kevin was saying about Canopy, our goal is to make adopting silvopasture as easy as possible for farmers. We find that a lot of our clients really want to do this. They've wanted to do this for 10, 20 years. Ever since they moved onto the farm, they've wanted to integrate trees onto their pastures. And you get 10, 20 years later, and there's still no trees in their pastures because they have a big, long to-do list. And on a farm, there's always 20 things that should have been done yesterday, and if not 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. So farmers don't have the money usually to be able to make an investment in something that they know is not going to yield them any return for 5 years or more. So what we do is we try to make it as easy as possible by providing the planning and consulting services, by connecting farmers with funding to reduce that cost in the investment of silvopasture. We have a nursery now that is growing silvopasture specific nursery stock. So the right genetics and the right plant size and the right plant type for our projects. We have a planting crew, so we will do the planting for them, and then we will come through and we will do the aftercare and maintenance after those trees have been put in the ground. So we try to provide the whole suite of services to make it as easy as possible for farmers. So they really just have to sign on the dotted line and we'll take care of the rest.
Very good. Thank you. I think you each have spoken some to what the demand for your services is here in the present and that led you to start your companies. But where do you see that demand going in the future? What do you think the trends are that are underway here? Kevin, you want to start out?
Yeah. So I think that for us, the big demand that we see is in land transfer. So the most common phone call that we get at Canopy, I tell people this all the time because it's so incredibly true and so there's a lot, it's complex. So the most common phone call we get at Canopy is one or more of a group of siblings that call us and say, "Hey, mom or dad just passed away. My siblings and I inherited the farm. And we all moved to the city 20, 30 years ago, but we're interested in reconnecting with the farm. We want our kids to reconnect with the farm. We aren't as into the corn and beans that are happening there now. We want to try trees. We think trees are a great idea, but we don't know where to start. Help us." And we get phone calls like that every day, and it's really incredible. And the rate is increasing. You know, the USDA has statistics about some insane number, some like 70% of land is supposed to change hands over the next decade, agricultural land. And that's just massive. And so I think it's our responsibility as the educators and the contractors that are doing this work to just make sure that trees and agroforestry are just at the table, have a seat at the table, are part of the options that are being considered at that point of transfer for what's the next steps on the farm. Because if it's not even an option at the table, then it's never going to happen. If they don't even realize that it's an option, that there are contractors to help them, that there are educators to help them, it's just not even going to happen. And so that to me is like the biggest source of growth that I see in the long run.
Thank you. Austin, what do you see coming down the pike?
Yeah, for us, it's different. It's mostly existing graziers who want to add silvopasture onto their land base. So for us, it's a matter of education and for the ideas to slowly gain acceptance in the larger grazing culture, let's say, which I see happening pretty quickly as more and more voices talk about agroforestry and silvopasture in particular, like leading voices in the grazing space, that more and more people are starting to put the pieces together and say, this makes sense. But primarily for us, It's farmers who already have their farm, they're already grazing, and they are looking to integrate trees into their farm for reducing heat stress, reducing cold stress, and having additional feed at critical times of the year. And these are active managers, active farmers that are already on the land. So we don't really deal with absentee landowners in our context.
Thank you. Next question I'll pose here is, so both of you have broader background in agriculture and in land management here. What are some of the challenges that are unique to running an agroforestry business as opposed to some other kind of ag or food or land management enterprise?
Well, I mean, I think the hard thing about agroforestry in general, and this especially comes out when trying to run a business around it, is that it's so diverse. Every farm is unique. There's so many different contexts. There's different species. There's different livestock you need to be integrating with. There's so many different things. And as a business trying to integrate with that, we have to be kind of prepared for anything. If we really want to be useful and not just say like no to 90% of the people that call us, then we need to have a pretty good toolbox and a pretty good kind of set of protocols where we can plug and play in different situations. And that's the way that kind of conventional agriculture has dealt with that, is to reduce the farm into just a black box that really has no uniqueness to it. It's just, no, we're going to do this no matter what the farm tells us and no matter what the people say, like, we're going to plant corn. Too bad. And, we want to incorporate those more holistic design principles and really respect the kind of uniqueness of every farm, while also not getting too complex and we still need to be able to mechanize. We still need to be able to get in there and manage efficiently. So there's some sweet spot in the middle that is between unmanageable, but maybe super productive and beautiful complexity, and incredibly kind of reductionist, not doing anything properly kind of approach to agriculture. There's some sweet spot in the middle where we think we can do both. And we're trying to position Canopy, for example, to be able to get that sweet spot in many different contexts.
And I can speak to some of the other business complexities. I have a business mentor that spent a good bit of time in the landscaping business, and they have told me that that landscaping is one of the most complex businesses from a financial administration side of things, because you're dealing with seasonality. You're dealing with different types of employees, some full-time, some part-time seasonal. You're dealing with different locations. So you're never doing jobs like right there. Like a farmer never has to leave their farm. They can have all their equipment, everything right there. Whereas we're going to a different job site every single day. And so there's that logistical challenge involved with that. And then when it comes to products that you're using for your install, you have your let's say shelf stable products, so your tree shelters and whatnot, and those are good. You can drop those off 2 weeks in advance and they'll be perfectly fine. But then you also have your perishable products, so you have your trees that need to be handled with care. And so that adds additional logistics, both because they will limit your seasonality and when you can do those installs, but they also require special infrastructure and special handling when it comes to that. So the logistics of running a landscaping business, we're very similar to that in many ways. But then there's some additional challenges. So for instance, we always have, on almost all of our jobs, we have two clients. So one is the farmer and the other one is the funder. And that's a key. We need to strike a balance in being able to serve both of those and being able to get or deliver what both of those clients wants to see. So the funder is usually a conservation group, and they have certain conservation goals that they want to see, and they have certain stem counts that they want to see, and they might have specifications that work in their program. But then the farmer is going to have their own goals, their own outcomes that they want to see, and ultimately the farmer is the one who is going to drive the project forward. And the funder can come on or can stay away, but usually the farmer needs some kind of an outside assistance to reduce the cost of investing in the silvopasture. So there's all kinds of fun challenges that come along with that, where we've had, for instance, we've had a couple potential clients that we've been working with for 2 years now. We've had a plan in place for 2 years, and we've applied for several rounds of funding, and each one of those funding sources fell through. So even though the farmer was ready to move forward, they weren't ready to move forward and pay out of pocket. So because of that, those projects have been delayed several years. We just put in a new application, so we'll see if that goes through. But there's no guarantees, and it really slows down the process of working with these clients. And then we might get into this a little bit more later, but there's also cash flow issues when you're working with a government agency. So, for instance, we have some projects that we put in this March, and because of some paperwork issues related to the local government agency that we were working with, we didn't get payment for 2 of the 3 projects until about August. And then 1 of the 3 projects, we're still waiting on payment now in December. So that's a whole lot of time to have to hold the bag on that funding to be able to carry the expenses on that project without getting paid. And as a private for-profit business, that's quite challenging.
Now, Austin, what kind of local government agency are you talking about? Not to name names in terms of municipalities, I mean, but what kind of function here of government?
In this case, it was a conservation district. And we've had the challenge of, because Pennsylvania NRCS does not yet support silvopasture, we have had to look to different sources of funding for every single season that we've been in business and doing silvopasture. There's not been a single project that we've been able to access one source of funding and then be able to access that same source of funding the next year. I'm hoping to see that. Hopefully some of this TNC money, the climate smart money, will help out with that. And give us 4 years of certainty. But because we've so far only been able to tap into funds when, let's say, a funding source happened to be able to accommodate silvopasture, or a group had some use it or lose it type of money, where if they did not spend it, it was going to go away. And so they made it available to us for projects. Because we've had inconsistent sources of funding, each relationship we've had to figure out from we haven't had that continuity of relationships with funders. And that's something that we're looking forward to when NRCS someday supports silvopasture in Pennsylvania, and when we get into more stable long-term funding sources for our projects.
And Austin, you mentioned NRCS isn't supporting silvopasture. Do you find any situations that the CRP, which is through FSA, is relevant to the farmers you're working with?
CRP is very uncommon in our area. I have not really looked at it for our region. We do a lot of CREP, riparian buffers. That's the big program in our area. But CRP itself is not common at this point.
Yeah, great. And then Kevin, over to you on some of these government funding dynamics. What are Canopy's experiences working with NRCS and FSA, and do other kinds of governmental or non-governmental entities figure in funder-wise also?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question. What's my experience with NRCS? Ooh, I'll have to censor this.
I've got my finger poised on the bleeping button here.
Well, okay, so joking aside, so the USDA has some pretty incredible funding programs that already exist and that have existed for a long time. CRP's been around since the 80s. Like, it really is great. like Austin mentioned, like often what's the issue is not that like does the program exist, does the funding exist, is it's are specific practices turned on or off in a given state, which is mind blowing that that is a thing. And then other details are issues with cost share and what like when was the last time cost share was adjusted for inflation, or when was the last time cost share rates were adjusted. It's inconsistent and it's all out of date, and it's difficult to actually cover the portion of the cost that's really needed to make people pull the trigger. And then you have to work within the rules, the design constraints of the specific program, sometimes which makes sense, sometimes which don't. And then you have to kind of, work around that, explain to the client why you have to do it that way. But overall, I mean, so we use CRP for riparian buffers, and windbreaks are the most common, because those are kind of true kind of edge agroforestry practices, set aside like these acres are conservation and these acres are production. That's what the USDA likes, this very clear delineation between functions. Silvopasture and alley cropping are way harder and are not really funded by the most common programs because they're integrating trees throughout your productive agricultural land. And that is something that is like antithetical to the kind of founding philosophies of these programs. But things like CREP, EQIP, RCPP, like these programs are starting to push those boundaries more. There's more innovation there. And I think that it'll expand over time, but there's definitely some kind of fundamental kind of philosophy type things that need to get updated.
Very good. And if there's any USDA folks or foundation staff in the audience here, we appreciate your effort. Feel free to razz these companies or the Savannah Institute next time the tables are turned here. So. I think the last kind of prepared question before we get into audience questions here that I'll pose to you guys is what technology would be game changing for your business, and use as broad a definition of technology as you want to. Austin, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I'm going to go away from kind of a typical app technology or something like that and say ours is more biotech, as in we want the right genetics to be available for our planting. So one of the most common trees that we one of the trees that we see as the most impactful and has the highest potential for use in silvopasture most broadly is honey locust. And farmers who have experience with honey locust generally don't have a great experience with it because they're familiar with the nasty, thorny tree that has 12-inch spikes on it, and not even the most ardent of tree huggers would go and hug that tree for good reasons. So what we are working on is let's select out those thorns. Let's get rid of the thorns. Let's select for trees that are female, that are going to yield pods and yield high quality pods and are going to be thornless. That's what we want. And being able to get to that point is going to make a huge difference for us. And then being able to make them available at a really good price point. That right there is going to be a game changer for silvopasture, and similar things with other tree crops like persimmon, being able to have easy to propagate persimmon that does not rely on grafting, and you have the same genetics in your roots and in your top, so that if you die back to the roots, it doesn't make that much of a difference, and you're not left with a really expensive seedling at the end of the day. And being able to have that for persimmons that drop early, middle, and late. And then for mulberries are nice and easy to propagate compared to the other two, but then being able to have really late dropping mulberries of high quality and have just a whole range of high quality genetics is something that I don't think we're all that far away from for these tree crops. But it's tree crops. It takes time. And I'm looking forward to when we make those improvements and are able to get those out and available to people at good price points. And that's going to be a real game changer for the silvopasture space.
Great, thank you. And one of our audience questions was actually about advice to farmers on picking the right genetics, which you've spoken to, Austin. So, Kevin, maybe to you both the technology question, however you want to answer that, and then maybe speak to genetics a little bit too, please.
Yeah. So I'll just do the genetics, I guess, really quick here. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really species specific, and there's not one great like central source of information about all species to give you a great guide. But I think it really is important to seek out the experts, get their opinion, understand your farm, your soils. I think that a very common mistake is people don't really understand their soils well enough before they go just either first of all pick a species or pick several species and then varieties from there. That's really, really important. And it's really about matching the species and the varieties to the land. That's really important. On technology more broadly, I guess I'll say one thing kind of more retrospectively. So I think technology that has really revolutionized our business already is, I mentioned that most tree planters that people use, even the base planter that we use, was designed in 1940. After the Dust Bowl, there's this big push to plant trees, and we figured out how mechanical tree planters work. And then zero innovation has happened on them since then, and it just is kind of mind blowing. I guess they did a good job initially, and they're giant hunks of steel, and they don't break, and they work great and awesome. But a few things have happened since then, things like the internet and GPS, and like these are revolutionary technologies that have not really fully been integrated into commonplace tree planting and broad scale applications. And so that's been something that we've focused on at Canopy out of the gate here, is just augmenting, not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but take the existing technology that's in the toolbox and combine it in new and unique ways in new contexts that haven't really been done before. And not only does that make our job easier and faster and more efficient, but it does allow us to integrate better with the row crop farmers that are often farming right alongside our windbreaks or alley cropping. When we first come out to the farm, they're all nervous. They're going to plant trees. Oh my gosh, they've never seen trees in a straight line in their life. And when we get done planting, they're like, "Well, your tree rows are straighter than my corn rows." Like, oh, like I think we can do this. And then like that day, as soon as they see that first row of trees, the entire kind of tense emotions that have been sitting around the farm that they all go away, and it's like, okay, no, we're on the same page here. We're trying to do this the right way. And that's really important. Moving forward, I am quite bullish on all the kind of automation that's coming down the pike. I think that we have a while to go. I think the most important innovations now are ways to make like our employees sitting on equipment more comfortable and safer and more ergonomic. Those like the most important things. But down the road, I think that for some of the simpler tasks like mowing, that can be automated. And there are already a whole suite of self-driving tractors and, Roomba type mowers that are out there. And it's just starting to really happen, and prices are coming down. And so I think over the next decade, that's really going to be a huge area of innovation and opportunity.
Great, thank you. And audience members, thanks for all the great questions. Please keep those coming. And let's dig in here on equipment a little bit. Wade asks, is there a decent tree planter that doesn't require a team to operate?
So I don't know what you mean by a team, but
people rather than horses is my guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, for us, a tree planting team or crew is usually 3 or 4 people. You have a tractor driver, 2 people on the planter, and then 1 person we call the float. And they're the one, it's not farming unless something's always going wrong and there's like something to fix or break or whatever. And like the float is in charge of all of that. They're in charge of keeping the tree planter stocked with trees. They're keeping the people on the planter hydrated and fed, and suck up any water in the bins, all that kind of stuff. So the float is really an important, like, that it's critical to the efficiency of the whole day. They're unboxing trees, whatever it may be. So typically 4 people is typically a tree planting crew for us. I don't know of any great planters that are like self-driving or automated yet, on the, at least for like bare root trees. There are some pretty crazy things over in Europe if you're planting like really small plugs that are exactly the same. Every plant is exactly the same, super uniform. There's some pretty cool stuff. But yeah, not for like larger plants, bare root, or that are able to work with a more broader range of species.
Austin, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say how different our contexts are, so that people in the audience can get a sense for how different agroforestry businesses, even though we're an agroforestry business, our context is very different. So we're not working in big row crop areas. Most of our clients are Amish. They have small farms, and the farms are on hills. And we are planting our trees along fence lines. We are planting our trees in small paddocks. Often, like our average tree planting size is probably 400 trees. And those are spread out quite a bit. And half of them are on fence rows and in places where we can't get to plant mechanically. So unfortunately, at this point, almost all of our planting is by hand. And we don't have the advantages of being able to lay out a whole big field with GPS and be able to go up and down rows with tree transplanters. That would really bring our cost down, which would be great. But at this point, it's all hand labor until we get into an area where the context allows us to mechanize and automate more.
But do you think the equipment is out there for the situation you're looking for here? It's just the scaling is not right, or do you think the equipment is just?
I'm waiting for Kevin to go develop all that equipment, and then once we get to that point, then I'll just go knock on his door and see what he can provide me.
Outstanding. And Austin, somebody had asked in the chat for a reminder on where you're located and what area your company serves.
Yeah, so southeastern Pennsylvania is where we're located. We're about an hour west of Philadelphia. But the county that we're in is called Lancaster County, and it's one of the highest concentration populations of Amish in the country. So a lot of small farms. Our farms kind of range from anywhere from, let's say, 40 acres up to 200 acres. We don't have much in our area that's above 200 acres. Our land cost is anywhere from like $30,000 to $50,000 per acre. So the competition for land is really, really high in this area. It's a lot of dairies as well. So that's kind of our context that we're working with. And most of our projects have happened in this one county, and anything else has been like within an hour radius. We really haven't gone outside of that yet. We are working towards that. But we've had a pretty tight hub so far.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So, and then the other equipment question we have here, I think is probably more of a Canopy one, but Austin, feel free to jump in if you have a perspective on this. It's from Tanya about mechanical harvesters here, berry harvesters, but could apply to nut harvesters too. And just what is your current philosophy on running harvesters on client farms? And in terms of who operates them, what's the prospect for the future, and how do you kind of keep a harvester efficient and busy over multiple crops across multiple seasons?
Yeah, a lot of questions there. I guess generally my philosophy is if you can't do it from an air-conditioned tractor cab, you shouldn't be doing it. No, but we do focus on crops that are mechanically harvested. We have a mechanical berry harvester, for example, and those are expensive pieces of equipment. And I do think it's really important, like, especially if you're designing a business or farm and you want to get your own harvester, which does make sense at a certain scale. a way to think about the farm design is how do we make sure that the most expensive piece of equipment has the least amount of downtime. So like if that harvester is the most expensive piece of equipment, it should be operating as much as possible. And so if that means that your farm starts with, if you have a berry harvester, that means you should be, starting with June berries, then gooseberries, then red currants, then black currants, then aronia, and you just, I guess honeyberries may have been first on the list. So like you just like if you have a harvester that can do all those things, like make sure that it never stops moving, because anytime it's moving, you're just losing money. And I think we think about, as a company that can do that harvesting for people, we want to diversify the clients that we're harvesting for the same way, so that harvester can be moving and working through more of the season. So that kind of multifunctionality of equipment is again, with the agroforestry and tree crops that are very diverse and multifunctional, it's really important. Same thing with Canopy. We're a mobile company. All of our equipment needs to get on a trailer to get out to the farm. We're operating out of these hubs. If it doesn't fit on a trailer, we're not using it. That's really important. And so when we show up to a farm and you only have so much room on a trailer for a couple implements and a tractor, if those implements are multifunctional and can do more than one thing when they're out there, or those tractors are multifunctional because they have front and rear 3-points and all that stuff, it makes that mileage and that fuel that you spent to get there that much more worth it, because you can do 4 things while you're there rather than one thing. So equipment multifunctionality is this whole incredible rabbit hole of efficiency to open up.
Next question will change directions here. Let me find it again here. This is from Joan here. Are you helping farms develop business plans and market channels they'll be aiming at, or the processing systems that they'll have to have? And I'll add on to that, if it makes that last part more relevant for you, Austin, the kind of the grazing. Are you advising on the grazing plans or anything like that? Business plans, marketing, grazing or processing.
I'll keep it very simple, and we decided to keep it very simple from the outset, as we could have gone towards the direction of we're going to help out with chestnuts and aronias and all those things, tree crops for human consumption. And I just decided, look, there's other people doing that. I don't want to do it. It makes my head hurt. And there's a whole lot more logistics that we would have to do in order to do that. Like for equipment, like we don't even own a tractor. That's how unmechanized we are. We have a couple trailers to get stuff to the site, and that's about it. Like we have shovels and all that kind of stuff. So we've definitely chosen the route of we're going to focus on trees that are there for livestock to consume. So here's our harvesting and processing and marketing plan in a nutshell: is the crops will drop, the livestock will eat them, and then we'll sell the livestock to the same markets, potentially at a premium. That's about as complex as we get for our clients. And we can sit down with them and try to estimate what the increased revenue will be or the decreased cost of doing production. But at this point, really, we have so few data points to work with that it's a shot in the dark of how much this will actually help producers. And for our producers, the main thing that brings them to us is shade. They know that their livestock needs shade. And it's as simple as that. If we can provide shade and provide these longer term trees that are going to have additional benefits, especially if we can keep the cost low, they don't really need to see yet the numbers, because some of the numbers would be BS anyway. And I'm not trying to come up with more BS. So we're able to put together a package for our clients that works for them as is, with shade being the leader, and then additional trees with longer term benefits as well. So that's kind of as how we keep things pretty simple in our world.
Kevin?
Yeah, in general, I think there are other resources for the educational piece. I mean, the Fan Institute is obviously doing a lot of that. And we want clients to come to us kind of having done a lot of that, having done that groundwork, kind of knowing what their market opportunities are. We can't understand and know thoroughly every market in every area. We can point people to resources for sure, but we want people to come to us with having already taken the first couple steps down that road for sure.
How about the processing piece?
Yes. So right now for clients, Canopy will do harvest if they want harvest, and we can do kind of basic kind of wash pack processing of crops. And luckily, right now, most crops that we work with, that's the market, is the kind of minimally processed, higher value markets. Eventually, as we grow and more growers come on board, and we start breaking into the more value-added processed markets, that's going to be a whole nother layer that is probably not going to be Canopy doing that. But I think a really important thing that as a community we need to figure out is, again, equipment multifunctionality. But at this point, on the processing side, there's a lot of equipment that is sitting there idle for 11 months of the year in different areas. And a great example is in Wisconsin, was the biggest cranberry producing state in the country. And there's all this cranberry processing infrastructure that is operating for 1 month a year. And the rest of the time it's just sitting there. And so you need to bring them a big enough load, like a semi or two, for them to even, for it to be worth it for them to even turn their equipment on for a day. But if you can do that, you don't have to build a whole processing facility. And that's huge. That kind of regional level economies of scale is something that I think is really, really important. There's going to be some optimization. The cranberry is not the same thing as a black currant or an elderberry, but I mean, they're like spherical, mostly water things, and you just squeeze them and getting juice out at the end. So it should work, but there's going to be some tweaks. So that's processing. I think we need to first not reinvent the wheel and find partners out of the gate.
Very good. Thank you. And I'll comment a little bit from the Savannah Institute's perspective on the business plan part, and got a related topic of enterprise budgets for new agroforestry enterprises. That's one that more help is needed on. We try to engage folks as best as we can within our staffing on that topic. It doesn't take too many requests to overwhelm our staff time to deal with the specific kind of business plan enterprise budget topic. And so the dream really for us is, how do we really kind of synergistically activate the other resource networks that are out there? So for example, extension small farms programs that may provide some kind of a interface that makes kind of traditional farm management enterprise budget resources talk nice with local food enterprises. How can we help make that kind of capacity agroforestry savvy? If somebody's planning a value-added enterprise related to agroforestry on their farm, what the local small business development center does gets really relevant. How can we make that resource agroforestry savvy? I find that about 2/3 of a farm or ag business plan of the savviness needed is just being good at doing business plans, and then there's a smaller component that's savvy about the technology or the sector involved. And so, how do we activate resources like that? Let's see. I'm going to take a question here from Tanya here. So in the farms you work with, kind of farm plans you've worked with here, what have been some of your best windows of opportunity to double, triple, quadruple stack functions, take agroecological functions, stack income streams, et cetera, across the, I like this phrase here, Tanya, the ecological facilitating / bill paying spectrum here. So how do you stack ecological functions and economic functions in these projects?
I can take a stab at it. So the nice thing about the work that we do is we are always coming into an existing grazing system, and we're adding that tree layer on top. So it's very much just a stacking of functions, is kind of what we do on every single project. And so we like to look at it through the lens of we are adding those trees in order to reduce heat stress in the summer, reduce cold stress in the winter, and we're able to take those times of the year when feed is most needed on a farm, whether it's the summer where you have a drought or the summer slump, or the winter where you have no forages growing, and we want to take honey locust pods and persimmon fruit and apples and whatnot and drop them on the ground as feed for livestock. So that allows us to take the existing land base and add to it through the right trees at the right places. And not just, let's say, add more forages during the spring, which that's what you would do if you bought new land. You would add more forages during the spring and some more forages during the fall when you already have plenty of forages. But through the integration of these trees, we're able to bring kind of a very different type of plant in there that is going to function differently and is going to be able to address the key concerns that are already on that farm. So we're able to intervene with solutions that are going to fix the problems that they're already seeing day to day and every single year on that farm.
Yeah, I think there's agroforestry, this is the point of agroforestry, right? So there's a lot. I think the easy wins are so we plant a lot of windbreaks, and windbreaks can just be wild genetics, or you can include more improved genetics and actually set yourself up to harvest from that down the road. The USDA has a hard time with that, and we're working on that. But there's definitely opportunity there to get both the kind of like functional and edible parts of out of a windbreak. Something that we're trying to do in an alley cropping context is there are some cases where we want to get trees in the ground and it's going to take a while for them to yield. And so, but alley cropping is difficult. Maybe it's the farm is too small, or maybe we want to get the alleys narrower, or there's no farmer that's willing to get in there and do alley cropping. So something we've been exploring more of is how can you use some of these other government programs like CRP to actually put some other practice in those alleys that is more of a conservation benefit and actually get rent through that program rather than through a farmer. So we've been doing this, for example, with pollinator habitat. We have the widely spaced rows of trees that are not yet bearing, and the alleys, rather than in a crop, are just going into pollinator habitat. And so, and getting $300 an acre for 10 years to keep it there. And that's huge for people that want to at least keep that land paying the bills while you're waiting for the trees. And so we're able to keep 80% of that farm in as income producing, while the last 20% is starting to get those trees going. And it took some conversation with NRCS to make sure the dimensions, they like those and that it all worked together. But at the end, it was a win-win for everyone. And so if we can get those ecological benefits while keeping the rent coming in, that's huge.
Awesome. Thank you. Austin, I'm going to follow up on something you said in your last answer here about kind of getting farmers towards fodder trees that are through dropped fruit or other fodder might be of a lot of feed value to the livestock operation. At what point do you see farmers getting interested in actually factoring that feed source like into their, into the ration or into the kind of forage plan versus is it more like how you described the shade dynamic, where as long as it's low cost, they're all for it, even if it's not tallied up?
That's really it at this point. I'd say because we're not there yet, a lot of farmers, so I'll use one farmer for example. So we've integrated over 60 acres of silvopasture on his farm already, and then we're doing another 20 or so acres in addition this next spring. And shade is the thing that draws him the most. He knows that his livestock are going to benefit from that. There is zero question in his mind that that shade is going to be valuable. But his cattle have never fed on honey locust pods. They've never eaten persimmon fruit. And so he doesn't really have a baseline for understanding how much is that actually going to yield me? How much benefit am I going to get? And I think that's going to be, and I'll say, like, he's someone who's already done, like, we'll have 80 acres in the ground here come spring. So he's far down this road, and he isn't really factoring in the value of the pods and the fruit and whatnot. So we're still integrating those because those are our long-term trees, and we don't want just our black locust and our hybrid poplar that are going to be there for 10, 15 years and then we take them out. We want those longer-term trees to be there, and so we might as well choose high-quality trees. But at this point, I'd say seeing is believing, and people haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet. I've got this copy of Tree Crops on my desk right here. And it's by my side all the time. This is my Bible. And I read it all the time, to remind myself, what were they seeing back in the day? What were they seeing in terms of feeding their hogs and persimmon yields and whatnot? Because you just don't have the data from modern university studies to be able to give you that confidence that yes, this is actually true. This is going to happen. And I think if that's the case for me, that's double, triple the case for our clients.
Sense. Yeah, thank you. And then we'll take just a last question here, and I think Kevin, this will probably be mostly for you, and just here in a minute or two. So from Robbie, how do you get a sense of what tree crops are underutilized and what might be overextended in terms of production versus demand, given that there's a few years lag between land transition into those crops and entering the markets, thinking about crops like hazelnuts, shrub willow, and currants? So how do you think through the avoiding kind of bubble dynamics with what you're advising people to plant?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real question. The first thing we do is we don't take lessons from California because they repeatedly do it wrong, and they're in the same boat there every time. They planted walnuts, overplanted walnuts, now they're tearing them out and they're planting almonds. Then they overplanted almonds and now they're tearing out the almonds and they're planting pistachio. They've overplanted pistachios and they all see the writing on the wall, and it's going to be a ugly end. And so we don't want to do that. We've seen the same thing with aronia here in the Midwest, overplanted without sufficient market development ahead of time. And, now we're seeing the effects of that. So we don't want to do that. Definitely, for sure. I think the best way to do it is just to be clued into the market, to the industry, attend grower meetings, attend industry meetings, just call around people that are growing these crops already, ask them. They're not going to tell you probably where they sold their berries, but did you sell your berries? At least get that answer. They'll probably tell you that. And if the answer is no, then that's, you got to ask them maybe some follow-up questions.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And if there's anybody from California in the audience, we appreciate your efforts. Feel free to razz us in the Midwestern states at the next opportunity here. So that does take us to 12:30 here. We're going to keep the line open if our speakers can hang around a few more minutes and have an opportunity for some more conversation. For those who want to hang around, for those who are needing to leave here at 12:30, please feel free to do so. Thanks for attending. If you're wanting to tune into something else here, you can catch the session on fencing, tree tubes, and innovation at the halfway point in that session, or the other one going is dispossession and displacement, the colonial roots of agriculture and forestry in North America. You can catch up to that one a third of the way into the 12:30 to 2 p.m. time. As you are wrapping up your PFG participation, don't neglect the evaluation that there should be a link to at the end of the day 3 links and schedule email you got. So thanks everybody. And like I said, we'll keep the conversation going. For those who are staying, I'd encourage you to turn your video on, and maybe we'll switch to just a verbal, pose any other questions or comments you have here verbally. Thank you.
Kevin, I've got a question for you real quick. What does your staff seasonality look like at this point? That's something that we're struggling with. Not terrible yet, but as we scale up, it's going to be more of a challenge. Is how do we spread our labor across the seasons?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. Tree planting season, April and May, you need 1 million people, and then January, February, there's not as much going on. It's hard. So we've been really leaning into the apprenticeship, internship model for those heavy months during the growing season. We've also moved to a kind of university or school style winter break, where we kind of force our field techs to actually take a portion of their PTO during a specified winter break period, just to kind of coordinate when that's happening. Then the shop can shut down and we know when that's happening. So we're trying to do different things like that. I had a friend recently tell me that the agroforestry community should be pairing up with the ski and snowboard community, because it's the opposite seasonal labor demands. And so we need to have the lifties from the mountains come down and work on the farms in the summer and then go back again. So it doesn't seem totally out of this world to try that out.
I can see those two communities overlapping pretty well. And then they go and they play river guide in Colorado for a couple months during the summer.
Yeah.
So, and does your ground freeze solid through a pretty good chunk of the winter?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's something where we're different, where last winter we had probably a week, if maybe 2 weeks of solid ground, which presents all kinds of issues for graziers in our area, because we just have months and months and months of mud. Does for a tree planting company, it does give us the opportunity that we could be doing more tree planting in the winter time. It's still not fun to be out there, but it is an option for us. Generally, our January, February are pretty slow, but we're looking at making advantage of those timeframes. And now that we have our own nursery to produce bare root, we're looking at being able to pull our bare root stock in November and have a window from mid-November maybe through mid-December or so to be able to plant bare root. And if we can do that with good success rates, that would be a big game changer for us.
Yeah, that's huge. I like our soil freezing. It means I can relax for a little bit.
Have you looked at seedling planting very much?
You mean direct seeding seeds?
No, seedlings. So rather than bare root dormant.
Containerized?
Yeah.
We do a lot of that, mostly for our riparian buffers. So we happen to have a really good riparian buffer, a native plant nursery nearby, and we have a lot of contracts to do riparian buffers. So that gives us a really good window from early October through almost Christmas, and we do a lot of buffers in that time frame. But we don't have silvopasture genetics available in potted form, so we're not doing any of our silvopasture projects in the fall yet. That's where we're hoping to be able to do, because I don't want to duplicate everything that we have in bare root for silvopasture in containers, because it just gets so much more expensive and so much more challenging to have the right amount of the kind of stock that you need. And so we're looking forward to being able to do bare roots, because we'll have control of when we pull the stock out of the ground. And we still have a chunk of time after that where the ground is not yet frozen solid.
And what about for canopy?
Yeah, so we plant bare root in the spring and the fall, potted we'll do during the summer. Cuttings happen in spring or fall, and we haven't done any direct seeding yet, but that's why I'm very interested in exploring more direct seeding of some tree crops, like in the spring, for example. But yeah, potted we prefer planting bare root because they're cheaper, they're easier. It really is better for everyone. But from our perspective, at least from our experience, but potted really has this great benefit that you can plant it for a much longer window in the season, and that really helps spread labor out.
And are you going to right through like the entire summer as being able to plant?
So if potted stuff is going into an irrigated situation, then we can. Otherwise, I mean, I prefer just for us by mid-July or really July, it starts to get really hot and it kind of stops raining. And so I really, June 1st is our hard cutoff for bare root plantings. I prefer to even have potted stuff in by July 1st. It just seems to do better if you get it in earlier and before it gets too hot.
Makes sense.
Hey, Robbie, you want to pose your nursery question here?
Yeah, sure. Kevin, I was interested in what your plant sourcing looks like, and I missed the first part of this, so sorry everybody if you had already talked about that. But I was wondering if Canopy operates its own nursery, or do you find there are sufficient nurseries around? Or I imagine, like most people here, wishing there were more suppliers.
Yeah, there's definitely not sufficient nurseries around. That's clear. Not only do all nurseries sell out every year, but all of them are at capacity. Like they're already planting all of their land that they own to trees, and it's a bottleneck that I feel like every month a new report comes out from a new state saying how there's just not enough trees. So that's not good. So Canopy does have an in-house nursery. We focus specifically on the improved tree crop genetics, though. For right now, we get all of our native wild genetics from half a dozen other nurseries in the region, and so far we're able to get what we need out of them, but we have to order on time and all that kind of stuff. And so over time, we are going to add capacity into our nursery to also do the wild genetics as well. So we, just like Austin said, like we want to have control over our quantities and when we're digging, so we just know we have the confidence.
Where's the nursery located?
Our nursery's in Spring Green, Wisconsin.
I use one in Spring Green. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Which does make it does complexify things a little bit, because many of the species we grow can't overwinter in Spring Green, Wisconsin, and so we're always digging things in the fall and putting in the cooler for the winter. There's usually too much going on in the spring anyway, planting trees. I don't want to be digging trees in the spring, so it works out. But we have no choice.
Well, Austin, I appreciated the discussion on the fodder, factor from silvopasture crops. It was my colleague Kathleen Rhodes was still on the line, I think, when you were talking through that, and so she's our new persimmon and black locust, brand new persimmon and black locust breeder, and so she and I have had a couple conversations recently about feeling out how early and in what way to start kind of factoring in what breeding goals for those crops. Are we really looking at them out of the gate primarily just from a shade, being good at being a tree kind of perspective, at least as far as how we're thinking about silvopasture producers as a end user, or do we factor in some assumptions about what a silvopasture operation might want specifically on fruit or pod drop timing or whatnot? So it's good to unpack that a little.
That is great. I'm very happy to have more silvopasture specific genetic work being done for the black locust. One thing that I saw recently that just put a question in my mind is I wonder how much more speed of growth that we want out of black locust, because typically black locust is going to be kind of a colonizing species that comes up in thick areas, and it's going to have kind of wind protection because there's so much of a mass of trees. But all of our plantings, we have like, a tree that's 20 feet apart from its closest neighbor. And I have a little planting here at my place, and I see a lot of just limbs coming down off of black locust, even really super young trees that are only 3 years old, just limbs snapping. And I wonder, and these are some, they have Hungarian genetics. So they've been improved. I'm not sure exactly what's been done on them, or what the selections were for. But I wonder if breeding for more speed of growth might not be a great thing for our black locusts that are already kind of susceptible to breakage. So that was just one thing that kind of came up recently, as a maybe I should hold back on wanting to push black locusts, their rate of growth, even higher.
Yeah, Kevin or Austin or anybody else, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking back to a conversation from a month ago with some of our team, and I think I was hearing the comment that that breeding for I think it's breeding for a shipmast type, which is kind of timber objective here already, is going to have a side effect of reducing. Yeah, the conversation was about reducing running, which is desirable because we want perennial crops, not early successional colonizers. And I wonder if that might also just in general tap the brakes in a good way on growth rate in a way you're talking about, but while still having a vigorous, successfully establishing tree. Yeah.
I wish I knew.
Yeah. Robbie, you're a state agency person, right? Currently, we talked a little bit about USDA, a little bit about kind of county level, conservation district level stuff. But any thoughts you have on how any considerations for companies like these two kind of being compatible with state program needs that come to mind for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the main one would be to look at your state's plans. In Pennsylvania, that would be the state climate action plan, the state forest management plan, and then any kind of broad strategic statements from the Department of Ag, and use that as a basis to tailor your work to gain the support of those agencies. So, for example, the Bureau of Forestry that I work for in Pennsylvania, we are supportive of agroforestry practices that are well aligned with our state's strategic, climate action plan, the forest management plan. So anything that's afforestation is a really easy sell, whereas silvopasture by subtraction is a bit more complex. That's a simple example of it. But the more nuanced point I'm getting at is that if there are funding opportunities and you can tie your proposal specifically to what that agency is describing their intention is, their purpose is, it's going to be much easier for that agency to support projects that otherwise probably seem very innovative, given that agroforestry is just not well known in many government agencies at this time. So that's the main thing. I'd get familiar with the messaging, and I would learn to tailor your proposals and your work to that. The other side of that's probably true too. I'm very thankful for Austin and I are both in Pennsylvania. There's other ecological entrepreneurs here that I learn a lot from, and I'm often asking questions to help inform how I'm speaking about these topics within my agency. So, I'd encourage folks to try to build relationships with people who are already involved in this work in your area, and sort of work together to have a two-way line of conversation about all this. Hope that's helpful.
Makes sense. And that's, that was, I immediately, when you were talking about looking at kind of the latest official plan documents here and tailoring, kind of working a message to what's meaningful to the agencies, that struck me as a good kind of, that's the equivalent of kind of learning and working within RCS to framing things around a resource of concern, for example.
Exactly.
Equivalent principle at work, so that's helpful. Good. Well, I think I'm going to have us wind it down here, but yeah, thanks again for folks sticking around, Robbie and others here. Thanks, Austin and Kevin. So yeah, enjoy the tail end of the conference here and have a good one.
Perfect. Thanks for putting this on.
All right. Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.